Through contemplative practice, it is often possible to understand concepts or to know situations through an expanded perspective. Once, whilst practicing contemplation, I had a sense of stepping forward onto word stems, nebulous shapes of stems that appeared beneath my feet as stepping stones, leading out across the void. This experience reminded me of similar states within musical improvisation, where I would have a sense of being a passenger rather than a creator, of following the sounds. There is something about creating from a position of chaos, of flow, that releases the artist to be a passenger in this process in a way that is energizing. This relates to the idea of art making as play. Kurt Simonsen, assistant professor at Biola University, writes, "In Kairos, we are completely and self-conscious, and yet paradoxically far more real than we can ever be when we are constantly checking our watches for chronological time." The saint in contemplation, lost to self in the mind of God, is in Kairos. The artist at work is in Kairos. The child at play, totally thrown outside herself in the game, is in Kairos. Kurt states, in Kairos we become what we are called to be as human beings, co-creators with God, touching on the wonder of creation. To create from flow, from Kairos, to weave the state into a piece of work can be a kind of sharing of the Kairos state, an encounter which for the recipient might perpetuate a desire for or offer a glimpse of transcendence.
So you said your film is primarily made up of framed moments. What is a framed moment and why were these explorations, these sketches, a key component in your research process?
So basically I'm coming to the end of a PhD at the moment, but when I first began it, I was exploring the difference between an aesthetic and a kind of mystical experience. And so my practice became exploring states, basically states of contemplative states, prayer states, improvisatory states, flow states, and that exploration was the beginning of my practice. It was the bedrock of everything. And I didn't know what would emerge out of it, but I knew I had to explore those states, understand their qualities, understand if you could access them as a practice. So instead of just being inspired, and it coming upon you, could it be something that could be honed and, examined and, I suppose, sharpened in every way. So the framed moments, so I began to record these moments, and they basically, I called them sort of framed liminal states. I was just putting a kind of taking those states, of recording them on my phone, like all the music was from improvisations I've done, and then filming with my phone, looking at things until I felt that same state. Or then it started happening in animation, or when I started collaging things and using stop motion. So all these things I started framing and making these kind of framed vignettes and just posting them like sketches online. And Ollie here He helped me a lot through those practice. He would improvise with me or make sketches. He also films and makes animation, and so I would glean a lot of his work as well. We both were exploring similar things, really. And that's what I did. I just posted those liminal states as sketches, not knowing what would that would turn into, really.
It's not actually a question that you've given me, but I maybe for later, but I'm interested in what you mean by a flow state for those who maybe haven't talked to you lots about that.
I suppose with flow, I mean where our consciousness moves from being a maker, a creator, from me directing to me being a passenger, to me being a receiver. Lewis Hyde talks about gifted states, and what he means by a gifted state is somewhere where the artist is a receiver, is a recipient of something that he calls a gift, and that gift comes through, and he says there's a different quality to the gift moving through a person than just purely the artist making on their own. And that really interested me. The gifted state was a different state of consciousness where there's an openness. And I suppose my PhD then became about looking at the way that the charismatic gifts as gifts and these kind of gifted states found parallel. And that's when I started exploring things like speaking in tongues and the prophetic, looking at gifted states. And Lewis Hyde, he says some really interesting things. I mean, I don't think it's the whole picture, hence why moving towards form, because it's definitely the craft is part of it. But there's something, he says, there's a transformative potential in inspired states, in gifted states, which is different. It functions in the world differently, the same as gift functions differently to commerce. So commerce, buying and selling, functions in the world in a certain way, but gift functions to open doors, is a kind of transformer. And so that was very exciting to me, that, oh my gosh, there's something about the crossover between us as artists. A lot of us here are Christians, some of us aren't, but there's something about the gifts that we're given as tools, the charismatic gifts, which share parallel with the artistic gifted states. That's quite exciting to me.
At what point did you decide you needed to move away from improvisation and towards more developed kind of craft or a kind of formalised piece?
I'm going to have to be so quick because we need to. What time is it now? But just know, I really quickly at the end of I did a Morphe talk last year, which tried to sum up a lot of these things I was exploring about gifted states, really, and the power of them. And when I'd finished the Morphe talk, I felt like, because in some ways I was trying to build bridges between the conservative and charismatic position, which is more, I won't go into all that now, but I was trying to build these bridges, and once I'd done the talk, I felt like I've kind of done that now. I don't really need to be exploring these states. But then I thought, okay, well, what next then? So that was the beginning of me knowing I needed to build something, but not knowing what that would be.
And where did the idea of the essay film evolve from?
Well, I think I started doing some sort of like morning pages, stream of consciousness writing. And through that, I remembered a documentary I'd written years ago. And I started thinking, I couldn't make that though, I'm in a music PhD, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long story short, I started realising, oh my gosh, through the writing, I realised essay film, which is a kind of, what you just saw, brings together all the areas of my practice. It's everything in one place, the research, the exploration of states, the filming, the music, the animation into one form. And so this is like the first chapter of what I see as a 3-part film, which will evolve at different stages. But so it came through writing.
Yeah. And I guess what I've found as you focused on craft and form, how does it differ from these kind of inspired states? Has there been any crossover in the processes?
I think a lot of the, so I know we need to wrap up now. So I think the main thing for me is that I've realised that the two states, the practice and the inspired states, they are both Ian McGilchrist talks about these two sides, you know, like the master and his emissary. We need both sides of our brain being fully harnessed and used for the full picture. And actually the Bible talks about it in 1 Corinthians 14, you know, it's like, should I pray in tongues or should I pray with my mind? It's like, do both, you know, both these things. So I feel like my faith practice and my art practice, they have to be utilising both. And that is the fullness. Sometimes I might lean more on one foot than the other, but that's it really. That's me.
We've got a few minutes. We can keep going. Yeah, because I guess I just want to push more into how it relates to your faith and things you've said to me about the Word and the Spirit, which isn't quite in this question, but I want to bring it up.
Well, I suppose for me that the whole thing with a faith practice, in some ways it's transformative. It's a transformative practice. And I used to think that the mystical states, like this, practicing the states was transformative in itself, you know, and I still think it's been massively important for me because it brings me a lot of peace and revelation and all these things. But it's not the whole picture, like the Word, like the things that are directed in the Bible. It's not just about me having a nice mystical experience. It actually says, you know, there's lots of scriptures about activities that we do. You know, it's like how we act in the world in relationship with others. It's about, the Word gives us directives. It's like the recipe for how to live well. And it also includes these practices which bring us into an inner equilibrium and communion with God. So I realised it's Word and Spirit, but also it's similar in, what did I write down, this thing about, I think being an artist is like being a disciple of God in some ways. The two practices are so similar because they require, like the vulnerability it required when you were doing your dance and things. There's a stripping down and making ourselves look silly sometimes of having to go through so many things to make the work. It's like walking the way of the cross. So the artist walks a similar process as the disciple. But I think the thing is with the Bible for me, it gives a very clear, where am I measuring up and where am I not? Whereas art practice alone, even though it transforms in the way of a disciple, you could look at a lot of artists' lives and the way they end up, the moral aspects and the way they end up living, it doesn't actually lead to flourishing. So I think there's something about the Word of God and the Spirit and these processes that we practice them all together. But today I wrote down something which was, it says, the Spirit and the Word, formation and deconstruction. So the Word is formative, the Spirit is deconstructive, and Felix Jaeger says it's these two processes. He describes it as an oscillation between the formational power of the Word and the deconstructive power of the sanctifying Spirit. He writes, according to Paul, victory comes as a consequence of cruciformity. That means walking in this way that we're commanded, walking in the way of the cross. That surrendered death to self-life, which leads us into resurrection life. That's so exciting for me, because if we walk that way of the cross, the resurrection power is the power of transformative potential, which we as artists have to offer the world, which affects the world for transformation. We're not just making art. It's not about making art at all. It's about living in surrendered obedience to God, using the gifts He's given you to ask Him to transform the world through you. And I think the cross, walking the way of the cross is really important for us. If there's one thing I want to give us here is that it's not really about making art. Forget about making art. Choose the cross. Choose to walk the way of the cross. And if you're meant to be an artist and that's your gifting, God will use you in that. He'll use you much better if you submit your whole self to walk in that thing, because the so yeah. So that's me. Otherwise I'll go on a big ramble. So let's move to yours now. Okay. So that's it. manuscript.